Hi folks, welcome back. Today I want to show you something that I noticed a while back while rewatching the second Starship flight, and which I noticed again during the third launch. It's basically a performance comparison between SpaceX's workhorse, the Falcon 9 rocket, and Starship's Super Heavy. And I know Falcon 9 is a mature rocket that has flown nearly 300 times, I think, whereas Starship is barely just starting out. Probably it is a bit early to make a comparison between both launch systems, but then again, I'm a nerd, so you'll have to put up with my nerdiness, I guess. So, for this comparison, I picked a Falcon 9 launch with a similar flight profile to that of Starship. That is, once both stages separate, the Falcon 9 booster is going to perform a boost back burn, just like Super Heavy booster does as well. I have synchronized both launches, and right away we can see the first noticeable difference between both vehicles, which is how quickly they pick up speed compared to each other. Already at the T plus 20-second mark, we can see that Starship has crossed the 300 km/h mark, whereas Falcon 9 isn't quite there yet. This dynamic continues throughout the first minute of flight. Again, at 50 seconds in, we can notice the difference in velocity. And if you think about it, all this makes sense because Starship is flying without a payload, whereas Falcon 9 does carry one. So obviously, Starship should climb up at least somewhat faster than Falcon 9 does, right? Well, once both vehicles are past the 1 minute mark, the tables begin to turn rather quickly. So much so that at 1 minute and 15 seconds in, Falcon 9 is already 100 km/h faster than the Starship. 45 seconds later, at T plus 2 minutes, Falcon 9 is already 900 km/h faster than Starship. At around 2 minutes and 22 seconds, Falcon 9's booster shuts down at almost 6,500 km/h, whereas Starship stages some 20 seconds later while going around 700 km/h slower. I also looked at the other Falcon 9 launches that included boost back burns like the Axiom missions or the more recent Northrop Grumman resupply cargo mission, and they seem to always surpass at least the 6,100 km/h mark, which is still around 400 km/h faster than what Super Heavy achieved during IFT-3. Funnily enough, on IFT-2, stage separation occurred at around 100 km/h slower, which most likely has to do with the fact that the booster shutdown occurred 2 seconds earlier than on IFT-3. So why on earth does this happen? How can a spacecraft carrying no payload accelerate at a slower pace than a payload-carrying rocket? By the way, the Starship upper stage does not seem to accelerate any faster than its Falcon 9 counterpart. I calculated the times for these two flights, and it is 5 minutes and 31 seconds for the Falcon 9 and 5 minutes and 28 seconds for Starship to get all the way up to 24,500 km/h. There could be several reasons for this. Obviously, Starship isn't in its fully developed state yet, nor are the Raptor engines, right? These things are still evolving. The vehicle structure will most likely get lighter and the engines more powerful. However, I also think that maybe Starship still isn't flying with its engines working at 100%, because if it were, I don't think it could carry any meaningful payload to orbit as of right now, other than a wheel of cheese maybe, which also seems really unlikely. So I am tending towards the possibility that SpaceX isn't really pushing the Raptor engines on Starship to their full capacity yet. On the one hand, because they do not need it. They were able to reach the targeted orbital velocity as planned during Flight 3 without needing any extra acceleration. It would possibly even be a little too much if they were to allow this thing to go full thrust. And on the other hand, by not pushing the engines to their limits, SpaceX reduces the chances of something going wrong, leading to the vehicle not reaching other more important milestones like stage separation, reaching their target orbit, and performing other series of milestones that are dependent on reaching said orbital velocity. Things like the Starlink dispenser, propellant transfer demos, engine relights and whatnot, atmospheric reentry. So yeah, in my wild speculation, I am tending toward this being the most likely explanation toward this velocity discrepancy, but I'm curious to know what you think, so you can let me know in the comments down below. Now I'd like to show you a couple more things I found interesting while doing these side-to-side comparisons. This was the first time ever that a super heavy booster reached its apoapsis, and it wasn't as high as what we're used to seeing with Falcon 9, which makes sense since it wasn't going as fast. 106 kilometers for super heavy, whereas Falcon 9 usually goes above 115, even above 120 kilometers. It's also important to bear in mind that the staging sequences in both vehicles are quite different, in contrast to Falcon 9, which shuts down its engines and relights them again after 10 seconds or so. Super Heavy doesn't stop its thrust completely, as it keeps 3 of its engines firing at 50% thrust. Moreover, apart from these being the first boost back burn ever for Super Heavy, it was not a complete boost back burn, as in going back to the landing zone like is the case with Falcon 9, and this could also be the reason why we see the speed of a Falcon 9 booster hit its lowest point at around 114 km/h or even above that, whereas Super Heavy booster went all the way down to 308 km/h. Really not much. And this difference in lowest velocity before starting to go down again directly translates into the difference we observe once both rockets reach 50 km in altitude. While Super Heavy is going down at around 3,700 km/h, we see Falcon 9 speed going well past the 4,000 km/h mark, sometimes even reaching the 5,000 km/h depending on how high the apoapsis was before they perform a reentry burn and slow down. Now let me show you something really interesting as well. During the Transporter 10 mission a couple of weeks ago, after performing the reentry burn, the Falcon 9 booster was left with around 4,200 km/h left at an altitude of 26 kilometers, very close to the speed that Super Heavy 10 also had at 26 kilometers. Now, why do I say 26 kilometers specifically? Because it is around this altitude, although maybe 25 kilometers for Super Heavy, that the air starts getting thick enough that it starts slowing down both vehicles. Now, the cool thing about this is that we can see how much faster the Falcon 9 booster gets decelerated compared to Super Heavy. I guess this has to do with Super Heavy being a lot more massive. Stainless steel versus aluminum. At an altitude of 10 kilometers, Falcon 9 has already lost 800 km/h more than Super Heavy, and the same is true at 5 kilometers in altitude, and then at around 2 kilometers in altitude the difference has been reduced by half to around 400 km/h. Now it's time for me to give you my 2 cents on the question whether Super Heavy will ever attempt a reentry burn or not. I have read multiple times that this will not be the case, that it isn't necessary because Super Heavy is a lot more sturdy than Falcon 9. Again, stainless steel versus aluminum, which I fully agree on, by the way. Super Heavy is certainly a structurally sound vehicle. Remember Booster 7? Even with the use of explosive, they couldn't take it down. However, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that SpaceX will go for it once Super Heavy starts doing proper boost back burns back to the launch pad, meaning that it will be going down substantially faster than it was during IFT3. Will air braking be enough if it is going 1,000 km/h or higher faster at 50 kilometers altitude? Okay, maybe that could be solved by starting the landing burn sooner, but will be able to remain stable at those speeds? Only one way to find out. So there you go. I don't know whether this video made any sense or whether it was even necessary, but I was really curious about it and I felt like sharing my curiosity with you. So I hope that at least some of you found it interesting or likable. Rest assured, I will be keeping an eye on the telemetry in the upcoming Starship launches, especially once the flight profile of Super Heavy starts changing. And yeah, thank you for tuning in again. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.